You think your little violin makes you an artist? You're just a roadie who carries my gear." The words, sharp as broken glass, sliced through the electric tension backstage. Axel Blaze, the aging rock star whose career had been resurrected from the ashes of '80s nostalgia, sneered at the young black woman standing before him. In her hands, she held a violin, its dark wood gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights of the stadium corridor. In front of a documentary crew capturing his every move, Axel snatched the priceless instrument from her grasp. For a moment he held it aloft, a sacrifice to his own fragile ego. Then, with a guttural roar meant for the cameras, he slammed the 18th century violin to the concrete floor. The sound of splintering wood, a sound that had survived 3 centuries of music, echoed like a gunshot. Wood screamed, strings snapped, and the soul of the instrument died under the heel of Axel's worn leather boot. He was just moments away from walking on stage to perform his greatest hit to a sold-out stadium of 80,000 screaming fans. He had no idea the young woman he just humiliated was the secret composer of that very song, and that the world-famous conductor sitting in the front row was there to see her, not him. Have you ever been mocked for the very passion that was the secret source of someone else's success, only to watch their world crumble when the truth was revealed? To understand the weight of that splintered wood, you have to understand the hands that had held it. Amara's hands were not those of a roadie. They were the product of a legacy, the culmination of generations of music that flowed through her veins like a sacred river. Her great-grandfather had played jazz piano in Harlem clubs, his fingers dancing across keys in defiance of a world that tried to silence him. Her mother was a cellist for a community orchestra in Philadelphia, teaching Amara that music was not a luxury, but a language the soul used to speak when words were not enough. From the age of 5, the violin was an extension of Amara's body. She bled for it, practicing until her fingers were raw, until the calluses were thick as leather. She sacrificed friendships, parties, and the careless joys of youth for the demanding mistress of classical music. Her talent was undeniable, a force of nature that earned her a full scholarship to Juilliard, where professors spoke of her in hushed, reverent tones. They said she didn't just play the notes. She unearthed the composer's original emotion, channeling it through strings and wood with a maturity that was almost frightening in someone so young. But the world outside the conservatory walls was less enchanted. After graduation, Amara discovered that the classical music scene was a fortress, its gates guarded by old men who saw her youth and her skin color before they ever heard her music. Doors slammed shut. Auditions were canceled. Opportunities evaporated. The polite rejections all carried the same unspoken message: you don't belong here. With her mother's medical bills piling up and the dream of a Philharmonic career fading, desperation led her to a place she never imagined: ghostwriting. Axel Blaze's manager, a slick operator named Frank, had heard a demo of her work through a mutual acquaintance. He didn't care about her Juilliard pedigree. He cared that her compositions were electric, blending classical complexity with a raw rock and roll heart. The deal was simple, brutal, and secret. Amara would compose the music and the lyrics. Axel Blaze would get the credit, the fame, and the fortune. In return, Amara would receive a monthly check large enough to cover her mother's treatments and keep her small family afloat. She took the deal, telling herself it was a temporary compromise, a bridge to a better future. For 2 years, Amara became the silent engine behind Axel's spectacular comeback. Her first composition, a haunting rock ballad with a soaring violin solo, became Ashes of a Phoenix, the song that catapulted Axel back onto the charts. Her second, a driving anthem of defiance, became Concrete Kingdom, which sold 5 million copies and earned him a Grammy nomination. The world saw Axel Blaze, the resurrected rock god. Only Amara, Frank, and a handful of studio musicians knew the truth. As Axel's fame grew, so did his arrogance. He began to believe his own myth, forgetting the quiet young woman who delivered his genius to him on sheet music. He started treating her not as a collaborator, but as an employee, then as an assistant, and finally as a roadie. He'd have her carry his guitar cases, fetch his coffee, and stand silently in the wings during his concerts. He seemed to take a cruel pleasure in reminding her of her place, in keeping the source of his success hidden and humbled. This stadium tour was the pinnacle of his comeback, a sold-out international spectacle built entirely on the foundation of her music. But something else was happening in the background. A different kind of recognition was finding its way to Amara. The legendary conductor, Maestro Vivaldi of the New York Philharmonic, a man whose name was synonymous with classical greatness, had become obsessed with the anonymous composer behind Axel Blaze's hits. He recognized the classical structures, the sophisticated orchestrations hidden beneath the distorted guitars. Through back channels, he had started an anonymous correspondence with the secret composer, praising her work, discussing theory, and hinting at a project that would merge the worlds of classical and rock music. He had no idea he was writing to the young woman who carried Axel's gear. He told her he would be attending the sold-out stadium show in New York. He wanted to meet the genius behind the music in person, to make an offer that could change the face of modern symphony. For Amara, this was it, the moment she could finally step out of Axel's shadow and claim her own legacy. She had brought her violin, the 18th century instrument passed down from her great-grandfather, as a symbol of her true identity. She needed to be ready when the maestro found her. She had no idea that before the maestro could offer her a future, Axel Blaze would try to destroy her past. The air backstage crackled with the energy of 80,000 fans chanting his name. Axel Blaze preened for the documentary crew, his every move a performance of rock and roll bravado. The film was meant to cement his legacy, a raw, behind-the-scenes look at a rock legend at the peak of his power. He adjusted the leather jacket that strained across his aging frame and ran a hand through his thinning, dyed black hair. That's when he saw her. Amara stood in a quiet corner away from the chaos, tuning her violin. The instrument's gentle, resonant notes were a stark contrast to the feedback and distortion bleeding from the stage. To Axel, her quiet dignity felt like a challenge, an unspoken claim to an artistry that he had stolen and now believed was his own. The cameras were rolling, and he saw an opportunity. "Look at this," he announced to the documentary crew, his voice a theatrical sneer as he swaggered toward her. "Our little roadie, pretending she's part of the band." The crew, smelling drama, swung their cameras to follow him, zooming in on Amara's calm, focused expression. "You know," Axel continued, circling her like a shark, "some people just don't get it. They hang around greatness, hoping some of it rubs off. They carry the gear, they tune the instruments, and they start to believe they're the ones making the music." Amara stopped tuning, her hands resting on the violin's delicate scroll. Her silence seemed only to fuel his cruelty. "You think that little wooden box makes you an artist?" He mocked, his voice dripping with contempt. "That thing is a prop. You're a prop. You're here to make me look good, to carry my stuff, to stay invisible. Do you understand?" He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper meant for her and the camera's microphone. "You are nothing without me." His manager, Frank, stepped forward, his face a mask of anxiety. "Axel, we're 5 minutes to showtime. Maybe we should—" But Axel waved him off, high on the thrill of his own dominance. He was performing for the documentary, for his legacy, for the 80,000 fans who thought he was a god. He needed to put this girl, this constant, silent reminder of his fraud, back in her place. He snatched the violin from her hands. "This is what I think of your art," he spat. He raised the instrument high above his head. Frank lunged forward, but it was too late. With a roar of performative rage, Axel smashed the violin onto the concrete floor. The sound was sickening, a sharp final crack of wood and history. The beautiful instrument, her great-grandfather's legacy, splintered into a dozen pieces. The strings, which had sung for 3 centuries, lay tangled and broken. The crew gasped. Frank froze in horror. Amara didn't make a sound. She simply stared at the wreckage of her past, her expression unreadable. Axel, breathing heavily, kicked a piece of the shattered violin across the floor. He turned to the camera, a triumphant smirk on his face. "Now," he said, grabbing his electric guitar from a stand, "let's go give them a real show." He strode toward the stage, the cheers of the crowd already washing over him, completely oblivious to the fact that he hadn't just smashed a violin. He had just detonated his entire career. As the roar of the crowd welcomed Axel to the stage, Amara knelt on the cold concrete floor. She moved with a strange, deliberate grace, gathering the splintered pieces of her heritage. The dark, varnished wood felt like broken bones in her hands. Each fragment was a memory. Her great-grandfather playing in smoky Harlem clubs, her mother teaching her the first scales, her own reflection in its polished surface during thousands of hours of solitary practice. Frank, his face ashen, rushed to her side. "Amara, my God, I'm so sorry. I had no idea he would—" "It's okay, Frank," she said, her voice unnervingly calm. She arranged the largest pieces of the violin in her lap, like a puzzle that could never be solved. "He just made a very public mistake. He expected tears, rage, a lawsuit. He did not expect this chilling composure. A mistake? He just destroyed a priceless heirloom. We can sue, we can—" He stopped as she pulled out her phone. "Amara, please, not now. The show is starting. A bad review is one thing, but a backstage drama could kill this tour." "Don't worry, Frank," she said, her fingers moving quickly across the screen. "I'm not the one who's going to cause a scene." She sent a single text message to a contact labeled Maestro. It read, "The performance is about to begin. The one you came to see." On stage, Axel Blaze was in his element. Bathed in a sea of spotlights, he soaked in the adoration of 80,000 people. "How are you doing tonight, New York?" He screamed into the microphone, and the stadium roared back. He launched into the opening riff of Ashes of a Phoenix, the song that had made him a legend again. The melody, Amara's melody, filled the stadium. The massive LED screens behind him lit up, ready to display the concert's elaborate visuals. But instead of fiery Phoenix graphics, the screens flickered. Then they displayed the raw, unedited footage from the documentary crew backstage. The crowd's roar softened to a confused murmur as they saw a grainy handheld shot of their hero cornering a young woman. The stadium's powerful sound system, which should have been blasting Axel's vocals, instead played the audio from the video. The entire stadium heard him. "You think your little violin makes you an artist? You're just a roadie who carries my gear." Axel faltered mid-riff, his fingers stumbling on the strings. He turned, his face a mask of confusion, and saw himself on the giant screens, his voice filled with contempt, echoing through the stadium he was supposed to command. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the video continued, culminating in the sickening crack of the violin being smashed. A wave of shock rippled through the stadium, followed by something else. A low rumble of boos began in the front sections and quickly spread, growing into a tidal wave of outrage. Simultaneously, in newsrooms and music blogs across the world, phones and computers lit up. An email, sent from a secure, anonymous server, had just been delivered to every major music journalist on the planet. The subject line was simple: "The true composer of Ashes of a Phoenix." The email contained two things: the same unedited video of Axel smashing the violin, and a collection of audio files. The files were Amara's original demo tracks, recorded in her small apartment, featuring her violin playing the soaring, complex melodies that the world now knew as Axel Blaze's guitar solos. The proof was undeniable, immediate, and catastrophic. Backstage, the manager's phone was exploding with calls from the record label, from publicists, from the tour promoter. But he ignored them all because a figure of impossible gravitas was walking toward him. Maestro Vivaldi, flanked by two assistants, moved through the backstage chaos like a ship parting the sea. He was a legend, a man who conducted symphonies for kings and presidents. He ignored Frank completely and walked directly to where Amara was still kneeling with the broken pieces of her violin. "Are you the artist I've been corresponding with?" the maestro asked, his voice a low, resonant baritone. Amara looked up and simply nodded. The maestro's eyes, which had assessed the world's greatest musicians, took in the splintered wood in her lap. "This," he said, his voice filled with a quiet fury, "is a crime against music itself. But your talent is not broken." He stood to his full height, turning just as a red-faced, confused Axel Blaze was herded off stage by security to escape the tsunami of boos. Axel stopped dead, his eyes widening in disbelief as he saw the world's most famous conductor standing with the roadie he'd just destroyed. "Maestro Vivaldi," Axel stammered. "What an honor. I had no idea you were here to see me." The maestro's gaze was withering. "I was not," he said, his words precise and devastating. "I came to meet the composer." He turned back to Amara, his voice softening. "Young lady, I came here tonight to offer you the position of lead composer for the New York Philharmonic's upcoming symphony. It is a project that will redefine classical music for a new generation. It comes with a 7-figure contract, complete creative control, and the respect your genius deserves." Frank's jaw hit the floor. Axel stared, his face a grotesque mask of dawning horror. The maestro wasn't here for him. The hit song wasn't his. The stadium-sized success wasn't his. Everything belonged to the young woman whose history he had just shattered on the concrete floor. The boos from the stadium felt like a physical force, a wall of sound that was sealing him into the tomb of his own making. He had built his comeback on her silence, and in one final, arrogant act of cruelty, he had just given her the world's largest microphone. The fallout was a media firestorm. The hashtag Axel's Ashes went viral. The tour was canceled, costing the promoters millions. The record label immediately dropped Axel, citing a morality clause in his contract, and publicly announced they were in negotiations with their newly discovered talent, Amara Williams. The documentary, intended to be Axel's triumphant legacy, was recut into an exposé on artistic theft and abuse, and it won an award at Sundance. The world that had celebrated Axel Blaze now reviled him, his name becoming a shorthand for fraudulent, abusive behavior. Lawsuits buried him, not just from Amara for damages and royalties, but from ticket holders, promoters, and the record label. 6 months later, Amara stood on the stage at the Grammy Awards. She was not in a roadie's simple black t-shirt, but in a stunning gown that seemed woven from midnight and starlight. She was accepting the award for Best Rock Song, the first instrumental violin piece to ever win the category. The song was titled Splintered Strings. In her acceptance speech, she didn't mention Axel Blaze by name. She didn't need to. "This award," she said, her voice clear and strong, "is dedicated to every artist who has ever been told they are invisible. To every person who has created beauty in the shadows. Your passion is not a prop, your voice matters, and your time is coming." The camera cut to the audience, where Maestro Vivaldi was leading a standing ovation. Her debut album, a fusion of classical violin and hard rock, went triple platinum. Rolling Stone put her on the cover with the headline, "The Phoenix Has Risen." The final chapter of Axel's story was written not in headlines, but in the dim, sticky light of a dive bar in Reno. He was on stage, his once famous guitar now looking cheap and battered, playing to a crowd of 15 people who were more interested in their beers than his music. He was playing a cover song. He had no more originals to play. The epilogue of Amara's story, however, was just beginning. It unfolded on the hallowed stage of Carnegie Hall. She stood center stage, bathed in a single spotlight, holding a new violin. It was a gift from the maestro, an even finer instrument than the one she had lost, its wood the color of warm honey. The sold-out crowd waited in reverent silence. She raised the violin to her chin, took a breath, and began to play. The music that filled the hall was not one of revenge, but of resilience. It was the sound of splintered pieces being put back together, not as they were, but stronger, more beautiful, and utterly unbreakable. Have you ever been mocked for the very passion that defined you? Have you ever had someone try to break your spirit, only for their cruelty to become the very stage for your greatest triumph? The story of Amara Williams proves that true talent can never be permanently silenced. It may be ignored, dismissed, or even shattered, but like music itself, it will always find a way to be heard. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in the power of dignity and the inevitable victory of authentic talent, then join our community. Hit that like button to show your support. Share this story with someone who needs to be reminded of their own unbreakable spirit, and subscribe to Black Tales Stories for more inspiring accounts of justice served. Don't forget to ring that notification bell, because you won't want to miss the next story of the underestimated rising up to claim their rightful place. Tell us in the comments below, what is the passion that others have underestimated in you? Your story matters. As the roar of the crowd welcomed Axel to the stage, Amara knelt on the cold concrete floor. She moved with a strange, deliberate grace, gathering the splintered pieces of her heritage. The dark, varnished wood felt like broken bones in her hands. Each fragment was a memory. Her great-grandfather playing in smoky Harlem clubs, her mother teaching her the first scales, her own reflection in its polished surface during thousands of hours of solitary practice. Frank, his face ashen, rushed to her side. "Amara, my God, I'm so sorry. I had no idea he would—" "It's okay, Frank," she said, her voice unnervingly calm. She